Welcome to the episode of The Rabbi and the Shrink. I'm Dr. Margarita Guri, the Shrink, and here's my favorite rabbi,
Yonason Goldson.
And the rabbi and I are here. We're so thrilled to have with us Daryl Davis. Welcome, Daryl Davis.
Thank you. Thank you both. Pleasure to be here.
We are just delighted. Daryl Davis became a part of my household discussions when I was growing up. He is 2 years younger than I, and still he was making such an impact on the world that he was a part of our discussions, especially on Sundays when we talked about social causes. And why is he known? Not only because he's a Grammy award-winning musician, he's gone from blues and boogie woogie, which, by the way, I love your stuff, and blues and rock and roll, to becoming known as the guy who became friends with and eventually influenced the KKK. So tell us briefly the overview of your journey from blues and boogie woogie, to somehow changing the world of KKK. How did that happen, briefly?
Well, basically, music is a bridge. Music certainly is the universal language, soothes the wild beast and all that kind of thing. But I'm 63, as you pointed out, and I grew up as a child of parents in the U.S. Foreign Service. So I started traveling abroad at a very early age, in fact, the age of 3 in 1961. And how the State Department works, the American Embassy works, you go to a country for 2 years, and then you come back home, you're here for a little while in the States, and then you go back overseas to another country for 2 years. So every 2 years I was moving. And overseas, my classrooms, my first exposure to school was overseas. I did kindergarten, first grade, third grade, fifth grade, seventh grade. And then I came back home. But my first exposure to school was overseas, and my classrooms were filled with kids from all over the world, because anybody who had an embassy wherever we were assigned, all of their children were in the same school. So to me, that was the norm. That was my first exposure to a class. If you opened the door to my classroom and stuck your head in, you would say, this looks like a United Nations of little children, because that's exactly what it was. So I didn't know any different. But every time I'd come home, there'd be a difference, because I would be either in all Black schools or Black and white schools, meaning the still segregated or the newly integrated. And this was in the 1960s, right? Just because desegregation was ruled by the Supreme Court in 1954 did not mean it happened in 1954. It took years for it to evolve. And so one time we came back. I was 10 years old in the 4th grade, 1968, and I was in a Black and white and integrated school, but there were only 2 Black kids in the whole school. It was an elementary school. Myself in 4th grade and a little Black girl in 2nd grade. So, most of my friends are 4th and 5th graders. Consequently, they all were white. And many of my male friends were members of the Cub Scouts, and they invited me to join. So I joined the Scouts. We had a parade in which I was the only Black participant, and everything was going fine. The streets were blocked off. The Scouts, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Brownies, Cub Scouts, 4-H Club, were all in this parade. And the sidewalks were lined with nothing but white people, waving and cheering and smiling, having a good time, until we got to a certain point when suddenly I was getting hit with some bottles and rocks and soda pop cans by just a few of white spectators off to my right, mixed in with the larger crowd. And I had never experienced anything like this. I had no clue why they were doing this. I thought I had done something wrong. I thought, they didn't like the Scouts. I didn't realize it was me until my Scout leaders came running over and huddled over me with their own bodies and shielded me. And I kept saying, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? What did I do? And all they would do is kind of shush me and rush me along, telling me everything's going to be okay, keep moving, keep moving. And so they never answered my question. Well, when I got home at the end of the day, my parents were cleaning me up and putting Band-Aids on me and inquiring as to how did I fall down and get all scraped up. And I told them I didn't fall down. I told them exactly what had happened. And for the first time in my life, a lot of people find this to be unbelievable, but it's true. For the first time in my life, my parents explained to me what racism was. at the age of 10, I had never heard the word racism. I had no clue what they were talking about. Because see, I didn't grow up with it. You know, I was around people from all over the world. We all got along. We played together, we worked together, we had slumber parties. You know, racism was not within our sphere. So when my parents were telling me this, my 10-year-old brain could not process this, because the people who were doing this to me did not look any different than my other white friends, whether they were my white friends from overseas, my little Swedish, Danish, Australian, French, German friends, or my fellow Americans from the embassy, or for that matter, my fellow Americans right here in my own country that were doing this. So what my parents were saying did not make any sense. So therefore, my parents were not telling me the truth. You know, I mean, that's a logical deduction, right? If you can't justify it, then it must not be true. So I did not believe my parents. Now, here's a strange thing, because I'm an only child. And so I always relied on my parents. If I had a problem or a question, they would either give me the solution or the answer, or provide me with the means by which I could derive it myself. My parents never lied to me, you know? And whenever I went to them, I knew I could rely on them. But this day, something was wrong with them. They were not, you know, being level with me, because people didn't do things like that. And I didn't understand it. So I didn't believe my parents. About a month and a half, 2 months later, Martin Luther King was assassinated that same year on April the 4th. And every major city in this country burned to the ground in the name of violence, destruction, racism, this new word that I had learned. So now I realized my parents had not lied. This phenomenon, this new word that I just learned a couple months back, does exist. But what I didn't understand was why. Why does it exist? Why are people like that? So I formed a question in my mind at that age of 10, which was, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And for the next 53 years, I've been looking for the answer to that question. So
can you put the pause button for just a second?
Sure.
Daryl, you said two things that really resonated. And one is, you could have reacted in any number of ways. You could have reacted with anger, with bitterness, with some kind of violence or revenge. And instead you responded with genuine curiosity. And doesn't that really, I mean, can you trace that to what makes you different? That you have now embarked on this arc that has really seen so much tremendous progress in this issue, because it all started with a place of curiosity.
You know, yeah, you know, people say, oh, it's courageous, courageous. No, it's more curiosity than courage. And I think, you know, to your point, I think because I had not grown, perhaps I had not grown up with it. So it didn't, you know, build and fester, you know, like a pressure cooker. And then, you know, if you don't release the valve, it explodes in you know, hostility or whatever. Perhaps had I not done all that travel, perhaps had the only white people I encountered were here in my own country and they treated me like the guys on the sidewalk, maybe that would have become the straw that broke the camel's back, because I'd already had so much of it and I would have exploded. I'm just guessing. But because I saw people who looked like them, I grew up around all kinds of different people, I realized this does not make any sense. Racism does not make any sense, you know, in and of itself. So, or anti-Semitism, you know, discrimination does not make any sense. And I think because I grew up in a diplomatic family, you know, my father's job as a diplomat was he was assigned from this country to foreign countries to create better relationships between the foreign country and the United States. So I was around all kinds of people, diplomacy and all that as a young child. While I may not have understood it at the time, you know, I was inundated with it. And you know, I learned how to be polite to people and all this other kind of stuff.
It's amazing. Well, I've seen you in lots of different interviews, and I want you to tell the brief story of how you came from that curiosity that wonderful question to somehow reaching out to the KKK guy. What tell us about the bridge to that?
Okay, so from that experience in 1968 and on through my teenage years and adulthood, I have bought books on Black supremacy, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, the Ku Klux Klan, the Nazis in Germany, the neo-Nazis over here. And all of that did not explain why people hate. It explained that they do, but they did not give a satisfactory explanation to me as to why they do. And even when I would ask people, why are people like this? I don't get it. Well, Daryl, some people are just like that, just the way it is. Well, that's not a good enough reason.
No.
Right? Okay, so in 1974, I was here. I was in high school. I was in 10th grade. And we had a class called the POTC, which stood for Problems of the 20th Century. And it was a class for seniors, 12th graders. I was taking it as a sophomore. And our teacher, fantastic teacher, he'd always bring in these very interesting people to address the seniors, usually controversial people. And this one day, he brought in the head of the American Nazi Party.
Woo.
Yeah. And just to give a little background, the American Nazi Party was formed right here, about 25 minutes from where I'm sitting. It was formed in a place called Arlington, Virginia, right across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., by a fellow named George Lincoln Rockwell. And in fact, I would later have one of Rockwell's daughters as a teacher. She had long since disowned her father and distanced herself from him. But anyway, George Lincoln Rockwell was a big proponent of the ideology of Adolf Hitler and was always getting into it with Martin Luther King. Well, George Lincoln Rockwell was murdered by one of his own Nazi members of his American Nazi Party. He got into an argument with the guy on the sidewalk outside of a laundromat, and the guy, shot him. But anyway, his right-hand guy, a guy named Matt Cole, Koehl, took over the organization. And his right-hand guy, Martin Kerr, were the ones who came to my school in 1974. And these two guys stood up at the front of my class and espoused the views of white supremacy. Now, you could never do that today, but we're talking about the 1970s, right? So I'm just sitting there listening to this guy. And Matt Cole pointed his finger at me and at another Black guy in the classroom and said, "We're going to ship you back to Africa." And then he went like this, "And all you Jews out there are going back to Israel."
Ooh.
And I just sat there looking at this guy like, where is this man coming from? And I didn't say anything to him. We're the same generation. We were raised to have respect for our elders. If they were older than us, then they were figures of authority. They were our elders. Whether we believed them or not didn't matter. We respected them. So I just sat there and listened to the guy. Well, one of my classmates piped up and said, "What happens if they don't go?" And Matt Cole said, I'll never forget this. He said, "They have no choice.
Ooh.
If they do not leave voluntarily, they will be exterminated in the upcoming race war." That was the first time I ever heard the term race war. What is this man talking about? And later that day, I was standing beside my locker, and I was the only one in the hallway. And here comes Matt Cole and Martin Kerr. They're leaving the school. They've been there all day for other POTC classes. And they had to pass by me. They paused about 3 feet from me. They didn't say a word to me, but they just glared at me and then sneered and began laughing at me. And then they continued down the hall and out the door. And, that was a trigger for me. I had to find out more about this. I graduated high school 2 years later in '76 and went on to college where I majored in music. But while music became my profession, learning about race relations became my obsession. And so 2 years after I graduated high school in college, I graduated in 1980. 2 years later, 1982, I found out about an unpublicized neo-Nazi, American Nazi Party rally that was going to take place across the street from the White House, in a place called Lafayette Park in Washington, D.C. That's where you go when you want to protest anything. and it was going to be unpublicized, so nobody would, knew about it other than those people that they told. So even the police didn't know about it. So I found out about it. Back then, you could drive up and down the 1600 block of Pennsylvania Avenue, which is where the White House is. But you can't do that today. It's all blocked off, just pedestrian traffic. So I went down there early. I parked my car and I waited. And this van came, and it was a black van, and about 13 to 15 guys got out. These were members of the American Nazi Party. Who did I see? Matt Cole and Martin Kerr, right? The same guys from my high school, right? And so I waited, and Matt Cole got his people all lined up on the sidewalk facing the White House, and there was nothing to identify them as members of the American Nazi Party. No swastikas or SS insignias, Gestapo uniforms, just black suits. And they stood there silently facing the White House. And so people are like walking by, it's lunchtime, and nobody knows who they are. And there are other protesters in the park, nuclear weapons and this, that, and the other going on, abortion. And so I recognized Matt Cole and Martin Kerr. I figured I have to confront Matt Cole now, because it wasn't that I was afraid of him before. It was just that I was a child, he was an adult, he was my elder. I had to respect him. But now I'm 2 years out of college. And yes, he's still my elder, but the dynamics had changed. In the past, it was child to adult. Now it's adult to adult. So I can confront him. So I walked right up to him and I said, Matt Cole. He like jumped back in the line, like, who is this black person calling my name, And he says, do I know you? And I said, well, you spoke at my high school. And he said, and what high school would that be? And I said, Thomas Wooten High School in Rockville, Maryland. He looked at me, he goes, oh, yes, I remember you. That was a long time ago. I said, yes, 8 years ago. Do you recall what you told me? He nodded and said, yes. He goes, how can I help you? I said, well, I'm still here. He says, well, I can see that. How can I help you? I said, well, I want to know who the heck gives you the authority to make permanent travel arrangements for me. He says, what's your name? I said, Daryl Davis. He put his hand out. He shook my hand. And he held my hand in his hand with his right hand, and he took his left hand with his finger and shook it in my face. He says, Mr. Davis, you have to understand one thing. It is in the interest of your race, the black race, to be a strong race. And you cannot be a strong race unless you are a pure race. And you cannot be a pure race if you are miscegenating with other races. It is in the interest of my race, the Aryan race, which is what he calls the white race, to also be a strong race. And we are becoming a mongrel race by miscegenating with mud races such as yours. So anybody who is a non-Aryan is considered to be a mud race. And because, there's color in the skin. And he went on and on and on. And, I was there, I wasn't there to beat him up. I was there to learn from him. What is making him think this way? Because once I know that, perhaps I can address it. And so I thanked him, and I left. Later that year. How long did
that take?
Oh, I talked to him for a good 15, 20 minutes.
Did you ask him anything else or say anything else?
Yeah, I figured, well, how are you going to get everybody to leave? Oh, don't worry. Oh, yeah, the race war. He mentioned the race war again. And he told me something that I've never forgotten. 2042. He mentioned this way back then in 1982. And I followed that ever since. 2042 is the year that this country will become 50-50, 50% white, 50% non-white, for the first time in our history, all right? This country was built on a two-tier society, white supremacy at the top and slavery at the bottom. And as we progress through the decades, we progress like this, perhaps like this, but never like this, right? And it's well predicted, it's been predicted for a long time. If you look at the US Census every 10 years, the white population is decreasing, and people of color, Asians, Hispanics, Blacks, etc., like this. So by 2042, it's going to be 50-50. Between 2045 and 2050, for the first time, whites will become the minority in this country. Now, while today there is a large percentage of the white population that has no problem with that. Hey, that's evolution, that's what happens, no big deal. I don't have a problem with that. There is also a large swath of the population that does have a problem with that. Because, when you have sat on the throne of power for 400 years, you don't want to get off. You look at you look at this last guy who only sat on the throne of power for 4 years. He still thinks he's there. He wants to overturn the election. But so that's what happens. And Matt Cole was telling me about this in 1982. So 2042 is only 2 decades from now. We will live to see it. So
God willing.
Yeah. And so what's happening is, when I first started this journey, if you will, there was only the Ku Klux Klan, some neo-Nazi groups, some white power skinheads. Those were the main groups, the Klan being the biggest at the time. Today, you got the Klan, the neo-Nazis, the white power skinheads, the alt-right, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys, the Three Percenters, on and on and on, all these different racist groups, National Alliance, etc. And they all are saying, come join us, come join us. We're going to take our country back. We're going to build that wall. We're going to make America great again. We're going to send those people back to where they belong, all this kind of stuff. And people out of fear are going and joining these groups to take our country back. But when the group fails in that mission to take their country back, some of these individuals get frustrated. And they say, you know what? If the Klan can't do it or the neo-Nazis can't do it, I'll do it myself. And that's when they walk into a Black church in Charleston, South Carolina, and boom, 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 shoot up 9 Black people conducting Bible study, or into the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh and murder 11 Jewish people, or the Walmart in El Paso, or the Sikh Indian temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. These people are called lone wolves. And as we get closer and closer to 2042, we're going to see more and more of these lone wolves because they're becoming unhinged. And like if you remember just a few months back, there was a group out in Michigan that was, they were plotting to kidnap and kill the governor, right? We have intelligence agencies that have operatives that fit the profile, who can join those kinds of groups undercover.
Well, let me get you to a slightly different place, although that's a fascinating story.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm especially interested in is for you to share then how the heck did it happen that such a gentleman as you would become friends with a guy from the KKK and then become a world influencer in the world of listening with respect?
Okay, so that happened. I was playing in a country music band, and country music had had become popular again. And I was the only Black person in the band, and usually the only Black person where we would play. So the band had played in this bar before. It's my first time in this bar. It was known as an all-white bar. No signs that said that, but the reputation was, and everybody knew it. And Black people did not go in. Well, here I was in the place. And, we played our first set, took a break, and a white gentleman came up to me and put his arm around my shoulder. Now, I don't know anybody in this place, right? And he's smiling at me and saying, man, I sure like your all's music. And I said, thank you. I shook his hand. And he says, this is the first time I ever heard a Black man play piano like Jerry Lee Lewis. And I was not offended, but I was rather taken aback that he did not know the Black origin of Jerry Lee Lewis's piano style. It comes from Black blues and boogie woogie piano players. Right. And so I said, well, he learned it from the same place I did. And I told him just that. He said, oh, no, Jerry Lee invented that. I never heard no Black man play piano like that. And I said, look, man, Jerry Lee is a good friend of mine. He's told me himself. He didn't believe that either. But he was so fascinated that he wanted to invite me back to his table and buy me a drink. I don't drink alcohol, but I had a cranberry juice. He paid the waitress. He took his glass and he clinks my glass and cheers me. And then he says, this is the first time I ever sat down and had a drink with a Black man. And now I'm like totally mystified, because at that point in my life, I had sat down with tens of thousands of white people and had a beverage, a meal, a conversation. How is it that this guy, who is at least a decade and a half older than me, had never sat down with somebody outside of his race? So innocently, I asked him why. And he stared down at the table, didn't answer me. I asked him again. And his buddy sitting next to him elbowed him and said, tell him. I said, tell me. Now I'm curious. And he says, I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Well, I burst out laughing because it was surreal. I didn't believe him. Why would a Klansman come up and embrace me? All I know about the Klan, that's not what they do. And I got every book written on the Klan, and I never heard of that in any of my books. So this guy's joking. So I'm laughing. He goes inside his pocket, pulls out his wallet, and hands me his Klan membership card. I recognize the Klan insignia, which is a red circle with a white cross and a red blood drop in the center of the cross. This thing is for real. So I stopped laughing. I gave it back to him. And we talked about the Klan and different things. But the guy was very, very friendly and very curious about me. Now, I can tell you, no uncertain terms. If I was not a musician and I just walked in there just to have a good time, dance and carry on, listen to the music, I probably would have gotten into a fight. I can tell you that for sure. But I was there doing a job, playing music that they liked, etc. So anyway, he gave me his phone number because he was so fascinated with me that he wanted to come back whenever I was to come back here again. He said, call me, let me know when you're going to be back here. I want to bring some friends, meaning Klansmen and Klanswomen. And so I said, okay. And I'd call him every 6 weeks, and he'd show up. And he'd bring Klansmen and Klanswomen, in regular clothes, not with their robe and hood. And they'd watch me play. On the break, I'd go over to their table, say hello. Some of them were curious. They'd hang there to talk to me or meet me. Others would get up and scurry across the room because they want nothing to do with me other than look at me. And so that went on for a while, and then I quit that band. And then some years later, it dawned on me, Daryl, you blew it. The answer to your question, how can you hate me when you don't even know me, that's been plaguing you since the age of 10, it fell right into your lap. You didn't even realize it. Who better to ask that question of than someone who would go so far as to join an organization that has over 100-year history of practicing hating people who don't look like them or who don't believe as they believe. So I thought, I need to get a hold of that guy and maybe get him to fix me up with some of the Klan leaders, and I'll write a book. Because there had been no books written at that point, and still, by a Black author on the Ku Klux Klan from doing in-person interviews. There'd been a couple books written by Black authors talking about how they escaped a lynching by the Klan in the 1930s and the 1940s, but not from sitting down face to face with their prospective lynchers. So that's what I wanted to do. And that's how that journey started.
Wow, that's an amazing journey. So where are we now? So not everyone has your courage or kindness or resources emotionally and socially. I mean, you've had a unique upbringing. And I think that's wonderful. I mean, I'm laughing because here we have an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, we have a Cuban Catholic shrink, and then we have this international musician who is a race relations and communication expert. Wow. What a mix, right?
Indeed. But but it goes to show that, we all have this ability, we all have this, but we have to know who we are. My travel, I've been now, when you combine my childhood travel with my parents, now with my musical career, touring around the world, things like that, when you combine those two sets of travels, I've been to 57 countries on 6 continents. And that does not make me a better human being than somebody else by any means, no. What it has done is it has given me a broader perspective.
Yes.
It is exposed me to different cultures and ideologies, and all of that has helped impact me. But I can tell you something, no matter how far I go from my own country, the United States, whether it's right next door to Canada or to Mexico or halfway around the globe, no matter how different the people may be who I encounter, they don't look like me, they don't speak as I do, they don't worship as I do or practice my culture. I always conclude that everyone I've met is a human being. And as such, we all want these same basic 5 core values in our lives. We all want to be loved. We all want to be respected. We all want to be heard. We want to be treated fairly. And we want the same things for our family as anybody else wants for their family. And if we can remember to employ those 5 core values or any of those values when we find ourselves in a culture or a society in which we may be unfamiliar, whether it's halfway around the world or right within our own country, if we employ some of those values, I will guarantee you our navigation will be much more positive and much more smooth. And it's those values that I have employed in the culture of white supremacy. Is everybody going to change? No. There will be people who will go to their grave being hateful, violent, and racist. But even if somebody like that is willing to sit down and have a conversation, there is the opportunity to plant a seed. But the key is to come back and water that seed, because you have to nurture it so that it grows. You know, my favorite quote of all time is by Mark Twain. It's called the travel quote. And Mark Twain said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." And that is so true.
That
That's
is
beautiful.
true. So
Yeah,
Rabbi,
one
I'm
of
going to
the-
ask you to comment, but let me read John Tenza's comment first. Sad that our country is still so divided. Daryl, I wish everyone could have your curiosity and strength. Communication solves problems. Way to go.
Thank you, John. You know, a missed opportunity for dialogue is a missed opportunity for conflict resolution. You are so right, John.
Absolutely. Rabbi, I always love to hear that Rabbi's input.
Well, it's one of the ideas that the doctor and I found we had in common. I talked about in my TED talk that when we put labels on people, not only don't we get to know them, but we actually don't get to know ourselves, because it's through discovering differences that we do broaden ourselves, and traveling and communicating is so critical to that widening, that enlightening experience. And you know, there's one point in your TED talk really brought tears to my eyes. And that's why I was so excited to have the opportunity to have you with us. But you get to the point where you first met, I think his name was Roger Kelly,
Yeah.
the Imperial wizard of the KKK. And you arranged a meeting. He didn't know he was going to be meeting a black man.
Right.
Which nevertheless, he was somewhat respectful of you. He was straightforward about his views, and you spoke for some time, and then you heard a noise. Now, when I watched you TED Talk, I had to rewind. Is that still a term? And listen to that story over again. I couldn't process it the first time, but it became my favorite part of the talk. Could you
Sure.
encapsulate that for us?
Absolutely. So my secretary set up this meeting. I gave her Mr. Kelly's phone number. I had acquired it from a former Klansman. In fact, the guy from the bar, you know, he and I became friends. The one who compared me to Jerry Lee Lewis, but he only gave it to me on the condition that I not reveal to Mr. Kelly where I got his contact information. And he warned me. He said, "Daryl, do not fool with Roger Kelly. He will kill you." I mean, this guy was genuinely concerned about my safety. And so I said, well, that's the whole reason why I need to see Mr. Kelly. Why would he kill me? Just because I'm black and I contacted him? I mean, come on. I need to understand what's going on up here. So anyway, my secretary is white. And I had her, now I only mention that, not that it matters to me, but it's an important part of my story. I could have called Mr. Kelly myself, but I did not want him to detect in my voice, oh, this is a black guy. I'm not talking to him, click. And then my whole project would have ended before it ever got started. But I knew if Mary called him, he would know by her voice that she's white. And I knew enough about the mentality that he would not automatically think that this white woman on the other end of the line is working for a black man, especially a black man who's writing a book on the Klan, because they didn't exist, you know? So, you know, that would maybe up my chances of him agreeing to the meeting. And then of course, when we meet, obviously he could figure out that I'm black, right? So in any event, she called him and he agreed to do the meeting. So we set it up for a motel room, and on a Sunday afternoon at 5:15. And Mary and I went and got the room several hours in advance. I gave her some money to go down the hall and get soda pop out of the machine, put it in the ice bucket, fill it with ice, get it cold. because I want to be hospitable. Regardless of his ideology, I was going to treat him like a human being, offer him a cold beverage. And so she got all that set. And I had no idea what this man was going to do when he showed up and he saw me. Would he talk to me? We said, I'm not talking to you, and walk away. Would he attack me, or would he come in the room? But I'm going to be prepared and offer him a cold drink. So right on time, a knock on the door, and Mary hops up and runs around the corner and opens the door. I'm seated in the room. You really can't see who's in the room from the hallway until you walk around the corner. So in walks the bodyguard, and he's wearing military camouflage, that same red circle, white cross, blood drop patch on his chest, the initials KKK right here, Knights of the Ku Klux Klan embroidered on his cap, and a semi-automatic handgun in his holster. He comes in and he freezes when he sees me. And Mr. Kelly was wearing a dark blue suit and tie and had not realized that when the Nighthawk turned the corner, he stopped. So Mr. Kelly had yet to come around the corner. When he came around the corner, he smacked into the Nighthawk's back and knocked the guy forward. Now they both are tripping and stumbling around, trying to regain their balance and looking all around the room. And I'm just sitting there looking at them like, wow, there's a lot of apprehension in their face. And I could see what they were thinking. They were thinking, did the desk clerk give us the wrong room number? Or is this an ambush? So I stood up and I went like this to show I had nothing in my hands. And I walked forward, put my right hand out. Hi, Mr. Kelly, I'm Daryl Davis. He shook my hand. The bodyguard, they call him a Nighthawk, shook my hand. And I said, come on in, please, have a seat. So Mr. Kelly sat down. The Nighthawk stood at attention to his right. I showed him some ID and all this. And then I sat down and we conducted the interview. I had a little black bag, canvas bag beside me, which contained blank cassettes, because I was recording on a cassette recorder, and the Bible, because the Ku Klux Klan claims to be a Christian organization. And they claim that the Bible preaches racial separation. Now, I'm a Christian. I've read the Bible. I've never seen that in there. So I'm prepared when he gets to that point and letting me know, I'm going to pull out my Bible and say, here, Mr. Kelly, please show me chapter and verse where it says blacks and whites must be separate. So every time he'd make some biblical reference or my cassette tape ran out, I'd reach down and pull out a fresh cassette tape or the Bible. Every time I reached it down, the bodyguard reached up to his gun. Now, he never drew it, but he had his hand on the butt of the gun. And I understood that because that's his job. He does not know me. He does not know what's in my bag. His job is to protect his boss. So I got that. So after about an hour of this, maybe a little less, the bodyguard relaxed. I went in and out of the bag. He realized there was no threat. He didn't, move for his gun. And a little after an hour, Mr. Kelly and I were just talking like we are right now. And out of the blue, there was a very fast, very short noise, like a, that was it. And because it did not belong in the conversation, we all jumped. And I just knew that Roger Kelly had made that noise. How did I know that? Because I didn't make it. So if you didn't do something, you blame somebody else. And so I'm blaming Roger Kelly. And I had all kinds of things run through my head. What did I just do to piss off this Klansman? And then the other Klansman telling me, don't fool with Roger Kelly, he'll kill you. I got all this going on in my head. And simultaneously, I jumped up out of my seat. I hit the table because I was getting ready to dive across the table, literally, and become violent. I was going to attack Mr. Kelly and the bodyguard. I was going to grab them both and slam them down to the ground and remove the bodyguard's gun because I was not armed. My secretary was not armed. The only person who I knew for sure who was armed was the bodyguard. You could see his gun, right there on his physical body. And I didn't know what this was all about. Mr. Kelly had made some weird noise, and I thought, something's getting ready to happen. I better protect myself and protect my secretary. So when you fear that your life is in danger, you go into what's called survival mode. And in survival mode, you basically can only do one of four things. Some people, they just pass out, they faint, because the fear is so great, the brain cannot process it, and the brain shuts down and they pass out. I don't do that. Other people, their muscles will tighten up and they'll start shaking and they can't move. You can be kicking them, punching them, but they're like this. That's called paralysis by fear. I don't do that either. The third thing people will do is to run away. That is the best option. as quickly as you can, separate yourself from the source of the fear. Get away from it. Seek safety. That's exactly what I would have done. But I didn't have that choice, because you cannot outrun a bullet in a motel room. You're confined right there. So the last option you have is to do what's called a preemptive strike. Get them before they get you. And that's what I was on my way to do. And when I came up out of my chair and hit the table, I was looking right into Mr. Kelly's eyes. I didn't say a word to him. I knew he could read my eyes. My eyes were clearly saying to him, "What did you just do?" But the interesting thing was, I'm looking at his eyes, and his eyes were asking me the same question. What did I just do? And the bodyguard had his hand on his gun as usual, looking back and forth between both of us like, what did either one of y'all just do? And Mary was sitting on top of the dresser, because there were no more chairs in the room. She realized what had happened, and she began explaining it to us when it happened again. And we all began laughing. What had happened was, the ice bucket with soda in it was sitting next to her. The ice in the bucket had begun melting, and the cans of soda were shifting down the ice. That was it. Somebody almost got shot over an ice cube. That's how crazy this is, But in that, we all laughed, once, Mary explained it, and then we heard it in context. But that explains two things: that we all are human, because in that same, no matter how different our ideologies are, in that same moment of that noise, we all felt the same fear that our lives were in danger. And then when the fear was addressed, we all felt relief, and we all were laughing. Who ever heard of a Klansman and a Black man laughing together? Humanity. We are human beings, okay?
Just think for a moment. What if that wouldn't have happened?
Pardon me?
What if that would not have happened? Do you think
somebody would have gotten hurt?
No. What if the sound had not happened? What if there had been no sound? Do you think your relationship with Roger Kelly would have developed?
Yeah, it would have developed, but maybe not as quickly.
Take that moment of we realize how foolish we all are.
Right.
Because of our own ignorance, our own suspicion, our own uncertainty, our own insecurity. This benign sound can set us almost on the course for destruction.
Right. It galvanized us, though, in the end, So, that was a seed planted. And how I explain it is this: the lesson taught that day, I won't say that it was learned that day, the learning would come later, but it was taught that day, is this: all because some foreign, and we can highlight, underscore, underline the word foreign, entity of which we were ignorant, that being the bucket of ice cans of soda. I mean, we knew it was there, but we'd long forgotten about it because we were engrossed in conversation. All because some foreign entity of which we were ignorant entered into our little comfort zone via the noise that it made, we became fearful of one another. Ignorance breeds fear. We fear those things of which we are ignorant. If we do not keep that fear in check, that fear in turn will escalate and breed hatred, because we hate the things that frighten us. If we don't keep the hatred in check, the hatred escalates and causes anger, which breeds destruction. Because we want to destroy the things that we hate. Why? Because they frighten us. But guess what? At the end of the day, they may have been harmless and we were simply ignorant. So we saw that whole chain almost unravel to completion, the last component being destruction. Had the bodyguard shot somebody, namely me or my secretary, or had I pounced across the table and hurt one of them trying to protect my secretary and me. So, but everybody here, everybody I'm sure tuning into this podcast, and certainly the doctor and the rabbi, you all saw exactly what I'm talking about. 4 years ago, last week, August 12th, 2017, in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the big white supremacist rally there. On that day, there was a lot of ignorance in Charlottesville. There was a lot of fear in Charlottesville. There was hatred in Charlottesville. And what did it culminate in? It culminated in destruction. When a white supremacist got inside his vehicle, attempted to murder as many counter-protesters as he could, by driving that car full force into the crowd. He succeeded in injuring 20 people and murdering one young lady named Heather Heyer. Ignorance breeds fear, fear breeds hatred, hatred breeds destruction. And the problem is with us, how we address these, we are not addressing it properly. We're more concerned with the destruction and the hatred and the fear. I say, put those things away, ignore them, forget about them. That's not the problem. What's destroyed is not coming back. So you might as well forget that, all right? We need to go, those are symptoms, those are byproducts of the root cause. We need to go to the nucleus of the problem. The nucleus is the ignorance. If you cure the ignorance, then there's nothing to fear. With nothing to fear, there's nothing to hate and get angry about. With nothing to hate and get angry about, there's nothing to destroy. The good news is there is a cure for ignorance. That cure is called education and exposure. And that is what I'm providing to these people with whom I engage in conversation. I reduce that fear. I alleviate that ignorance. And therefore, the hatred comes down. Those are byproducts. Why don't we focus our attention, our finance, our money, our efforts, our energy on the ignorance, on educating and alleviating the ignorance? Then those symptoms will go away.
Wow. Wow. I saw you on a talk show with Dr. Bernice King,
Mm-hmm.
and the KKK guy and a few other people, some pastor and
Well, how
whatever.
that came about,
Yeah.
she had called and wanted me to come down and speak on Martin Luther King Day and talk about my work with the Klan. And I said, well, how about if I bring a former Klan leader? She goes, huh? I said, yeah. Well, she'd never done that before. But you know what? To her credit, she walks the walk. She's just like her father. Will
She
talk
really
to anybody.
does. And so do you, sir. So do you.
And so I brought Scott Shepard. That's who you're talking about.
Scott Shepard. I knew it was Mr. Shepard, couldn't remember his first name. You know, the coolest thing about that whole thing is she made the statement that the bottom line, what we need to do, and what Dr. Martin Luther King said, what you said, many musicians have said, and all those smart musicians were wise enough to ask you to play with them. Chuck Berry and Aretha being my two favorites. The whole idea is what's missing is, and Mr. Shepard talked about, he grew up without love, without enough love. And in order to find his place, he found a group full of hate, whether it's a gang or neo-Nazis or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he found a hate-filled group. And you all came up with a solution of love. So in the face of all this, sir, what do you suggest people do? We're talking to someone that boils our blood. We're not understanding someone. Your secret weapon was listening with respect. So talk about a few things we can do, all of us, to make this world a better place by, what is the secret to listening with true curiosity? Okay.
Well, we spend way too much time in this country, talking about the other person.
We do.
Or talking at the other person.
But it's all their fault. If they just agreed with you, we'd be good.
We'd all be good.
We'd be fine.
Or we talk past the other person. Why would you spend 5 minutes talking with the other person? Because in those 5 minutes, I will guarantee, I don't care how far apart you are on the spectrum from each other. There's a big gap there. You spend 5 minutes, you will find something in common, and that gap is going to narrow a little bit. Spend another 5 minutes, you're going to find more in common. And now you're at the point where you're in a relationship with that person. You may not agree with everything, but you're in a relationship, and you keep on talking, you find more in common, and now you're heading towards a friendship. And at this point, the trivial things that you don't have in common, such as skin color, or if you worship at a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or a temple, begin to matter less and less. So, when two enemies are talking, they're not fighting, they're talking. They may be disagreeing, but at least they're talking. It's when the conversation ceases that the ground becomes fertile for violence. So we want to keep the conversation going. And, I'm not advocating that everybody out here, go to a Klan rally or a neo-Nazi rally or whatever. No, I'm not saying that at all. Unless that's what you want to do and you know how to do it. Some people, they're not prepared for that. But there are things that we all can do. All right. I'm on the front line. If the front line is something that makes you feel uncomfortable, that's fine. I get it. You can be on the back line. You can be on the sideline. You can be online.
How? What do they do?
They offer support for those on the front line.
Okay.
They let people know. They pass on messages, things like that. That kind of support is all needed, a 360. So it's just like, your favorite movie, you know who starred in it, and you know why it was so good, and you know the names of the actors, but it wasn't just them that made that movie great and got an Oscar. How about the people behind the camera, the people who set up the stage and did the stunts? You don't know their names, but those are people on the back line, on the sideline. And of course, all the promo online, So there are all kinds of support roles that make the whole thing great. And nobody is any less important than the people on the front line. I'm telling you.
Rabbi?
I lived for 9 years in Israel. And Israel, we have all kinds of challenges, some external and many internal. There's a tremendous amount of tension between the religious and the non-religious. There is a tremendous amount of tension between the Jewish population and the Arab population. Mm-hmm. And there have been groups that have actually organized conversations. Bring the religious and the irreligious not together, not to talk about religion, not to debate, not to discuss, but simply to get to know each other. Bring together Jews and Arabs, not to talk politics, not to talk whose version of history is correct, but simply to get to know each other as human beings. And it seems to me that's what I hear from you. You didn't set out to convince the Klansmen that they were wrong.
Exactly, precisely. And when you see my name in the press, it upsets me a little bit because they always mischaracterize me. Black musician converts X number of KKK people. I never converted anybody. They converted themselves. I was simply the impetus, providing them with information to rethink. And they came to the conclusion, I need to get out of here. I never wouldn't say, hey, now you're wrong. Get out of this organization. Give me your robe and hood. All of that happened, but it happened because they wanted to do it. It happened because they were influenced by the information I imparted to them. And speaking of Israel, the State Department sent me there to tour Israel for five days, different places to talk about race relations and conflict resolution. Yeah, and I went to Haifa, Beersheba, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv. I forgot the other place, but at one point I was taken to a university where Jews, Arabs, and Palestinians were all in class together. I'd never seen that before, and that's what needs to be shown in the media.
Men and women, or just men?
No, men and women. They were students, all in the same classroom. They were questioning me. I'm addressing them and all that kind of stuff. Now, I left after I gave my lecture because I had to go somewhere else and do another lecture. I don't know if, after school, do these people hang out together? Do they go to happy hour together? I don't know. But I do know that they all were in the same classroom and there was no conflict, And this is what needs to be publicized. But I think oftentimes the media omits a lot of things,
Oh, yes, no doubt about it.
We never noticed.
Yeah. No. That's we'll need another hour for that one. But you're being a musician. We talked a little bit about it, but I think it's so integral to your story because in Hebrew, everybody knows the Hebrew word shalom, which is usually translated as peace, but it's more accurately translated as harmony. And what is harmony? It's what would happen if all of you musicians were playing the same notes on the same instrument?
It'd be unison.
Yeah, it wouldn't sound very good.
No.
It's the differences that create the beauty. And it's that synthesis of bringing together different parts in a way that they fuse into an organic whole, and our differences become a source of strength, and we become greater than the sum of our parts.
Well, you have just
the thing of beauty.
You have just defined my entire mission, because absolutely, and you said it a lot better than I do. How I put it is, look, I'm a band leader. And my job as a band leader is to bring harmony on my bandstand, on my stage, between the different voices, whether it's the vocal voices, the guitar, the piano, the saxophone, the bass, the drums, or whatever else I have on stage. I want them to be in harmony. The only time I want dissonance is when I intentionally inject it into a piece of music for effect. You know, if it happens randomly, that's not music, that's noise. That's because somebody hit a bad note or they went out of tune or something, right? So, you know, you only want dissonance when you intentionally direct it. Otherwise, you want everything to blend harmony. You know? Like that's the beauty, yeah. And so now, so if that's my job as a musician, to bring that harmony on my stage amongst my musicians, wouldn't I want the same thing when I step off that stage and I'm going through society? I want people around me to be harmonious.
Yes.
You know, look, when, you know, we remember in this country going from black and white TV to color TV. Remember the NBC Peacock and all that? Some of these people out here might be too young for that. But anyway, you all know what I'm talking about, right? We went from black and white, you know, to color. It was like, you know, one dimensional to all of a sudden something else. When I was overseas going to school as a kid, and when I would come back here, it was like, it was the reverse. It was going from color TV to black and white. Because there was not the color in this country at the time that I had overseas. I was literally living about 10 years ahead of my time, being around that many people, you know, and over here we're segregated. So it's important, you know, as you point out, you know, to bring that harmony, bring those different colors and sounds together, blend them. That's what makes, you know, and you can still maintain your individualism, absolutely. But sharing what you know and learning what somebody else knows is what enhances society.
Well, your beautiful spirit and your beautiful voice certainly don't hurt in terms of helping everyone hear your message.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think it's come to the time, the rabbi's going to do a word of the day, and then we'll ask you, sir, Mr. Davis, to come up with one final thought, call to action, or whatever, and then I'll finish off. It's been amazing. I could talk to you for a long time.
Well, let's do part two sometime.
I would love that. And please let us know how we may be of service to you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rabbi, sir, word of the day.
Well, the word of the day comes to us from Susan Rooks, the grammar goddess, previous guest on our show, and you can find her program and all of our other episodes on our website, therabbiandtheshrink.com. And this week's word is liminal. Liminal, which means relating to or situated at a sensory threshold, barely perceptible or capable of eliciting a response, with the sense of being a point of transition. And what I love about your story, Daryl, is it's filled with these moments where at the time, it may not have been clear that this was a critical moment. But often those critical moments go unnoticed. I just remember the story I wanted to tell about this.
Good.
One of my rabbis, a blessed memory, he grew up in America many, many decades ago. And he went to Israel, lived there for many years, and he was on a return. He was on a flight back. Back in those days, you may remember, some of us remember, that there was one screen with one movie. And he hadn't seen a movie in years. And they passed out headphones. And he thought, well, let's see what kind of movies people are watching these days. And as he's watching the movie, the first thought that enters his mind is, you can always tell when something important is about to happen in a movie. How do you tell?
The music.
The music starts to swell.
Mm-hmm.
And it tips you off. And he said, wouldn't it be great if life had background music?
Yeah.
We'd always know when something important is about to happen.
And you know, let me tell you something. There, you know, you can major in what's called music therapy in college. It's still a relatively new term.
Yes.
But this is why they play certain kinds of music in the psych ward in hospitals, why they play certain kinds of music in the prisons, you know, or even
in the shopping centers.
In the shopping centers, right?
There's some music that makes you want to buy.
Exactly. You know, you think it's just random music. No, it's programmed. Or in the dentist's office, it's music to calm you down while somebody's, there you go.
There you know,
Absolutely. So, music is a lot more critical to our lives than people realize. People think it's a luxury. And whenever the budget gets cut for schools, they cut out the arts. No, bring them back in. It is critical. And there's so much more music can do. I play at a lot of nursing homes. I volunteer and go in there and play for the residents. You will see people who have stopped talking. They're sitting in their wheelchairs or whatever. They don't talk anymore. And I'll play some song from the 1940s of their youth. All of a sudden they start singing and they know the words. They remember every word to Sentimental Journey or It Had to Be You or whatever. And they can't remember what they had for breakfast 10 minutes ago or something. Music touches people. When you hear a certain song, it triggers something in you. It takes you back to where you were when you last heard that song. Maybe you were dancing with your prom date back in high school. It's like perfume. You walk down the sidewalk and you get a whiff of some lady's perfume. So also you remember your grandmother because she wore that same perfume. Music is the same way.
Yeah, and sometimes we have to create the music in our own minds.
Yeah.
Because if the music isn't there, we live every moment as if the music's swelling, because you never know. This may be a moment that's going to change my life and the lives of others.
Perhaps what we should do is make more people watch a movie and kill the audio, the music track, and then they'd get it.
Well, that's good advice. So do you have some final words of wisdom for our group until the next time you come, and hope you'll join us again?
I don't know how wise I am, because a lot of people tell me that I'm crazy, but
well, crazy or wise, I think people who have futuristic thoughts have been called worse than that.
I will say this. I am just an ordinary person. I am not a psychologist. I'm not a sociologist. I'm just a rock and roll piano player. And if I can do this, anybody can do this. Know who you are. Take the opportunity to walk across the cafeteria. What do I mean by that? In a lot of metropolitan areas, whether it's school or offices, people from different backgrounds, diverse, religions, colors of skin, ethnicities, they work together in the classroom or in the office. They might even share the same cubicle. But what happens at 12 noon? People go downstairs to the cafeteria, and Blacks sit with Blacks, Hispanics with Hispanics, et cetera, right? Does that mean that they're racist? No, not necessarily. People they self-segregate because people tend to feel more comfortable around someone who shares a familiar, religion or language or whatever, right? And that's fine. The problem is if somebody comes to sit with you, you say, you can't sit at our table, then that's a problem. But just self-segregating is not a problem. But maybe once or twice a week, walk across the cafeteria, leave your familiar group, and go sit with somebody else, because you've got a lot to learn from them, and they have a lot to learn from you. And guess what? You might make a new friend. The best weapon in this country to fight anti-Semitism and racism, the most amazing thing is this weapon doesn't cost anything. It's free, but yet it is the least weapon used. It's called communication. What does it cost you to walk across the cafeteria and sit at somebody else's table during your lunch break and just have a conversation? It's free. A missed opportunity for dialogue is a missed opportunity for conflict resolution. Let's all converse.
Well, thank you for conversing with us, Joe.
Thank you.
So grateful you came on. You have your appearance platform is much larger than ours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I do appreciate it.
So thanks so much. And Doctor, do you have a last word for us?
Oh, I'm never short a comment. Thank you. Mr. Davis, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Rabbi, is always a real pleasure. Here are my last words. Let's follow. Well, first I have to disagree. You said you're an ordinary guy, and I get what you mean, but I laugh about that. To me, you're an extraordinary regular guy. We can agree to add the extraordinary regular guy, then I can agree with you. I think your attitude of openness was very courageous. John Tenza wants to vote for you for president. My twin sister says she thought you were walking the walk in the Jesus way. Sorry, Rabbi, or Moses, I guess Moses way. We can add that. So here's my final words. Soundtrack. I often tell everyone, what is the soundtrack for this part of your life, whether it's this day, this moment, this year? choose a soundtrack. There's always some discord somewhere. Is there someone in your family you haven't spoken to or you don't understand? So I have a call to action that is from Mr. Davis, the good rabbi, and myself. Please call that person and listen. Ask them about them. Ask them about their garden. Ask them about what they're doing. Just reach out and listen with respect. And then maybe we'll be adding our voices and our beautiful soundtrack to Mr. Davis's mission, which is a shared mission with the rabbi and the shrink. So that's all I have to say about that. Everyone be well, listen with respect, and we'll see you every Tuesday at 12:30 for the Rabbi and the Shrink. Again, thank you, Mr. Davis.
Thank you.